We're going to be looking at exponential formula. There's actually three rules that we're going to be looking at today. The first one, we're going to look at examples 1 and 2. Like I said, I'm going to look at all the way to question number 6. There's three rules I want to cover. The first one, we call that multiplication. Well, one rule I know that exponent means repeated multiplication. So let's say I had something like x squared times x to the third. Let's say I had that. I know the x squared basically means I'm multiplying x twice. So that will give me x times x. The x to the third basically means I'm multiplying x 3 times. So I'm going to go times x times x times x. Now, notice how I'm multiplying x all together. So that basically means I'm multiplying x, in this case, 5 times, right? We can count how many times I'm multiplying x, 5 times. Now, in multiplication, we call this the product rule in exponents. Multiplication, as long as the base is the same, notice my letter was the same, x, all I have to do in reality is add my numbers. That's all I have to do. So we're going to be working on that. Let's take a look at question number 1. First, I'm going to go with the easy stuff, whole numbers, right? We know how to multiply whole numbers, so I'm just going to multiply that out. -2 times -2. I know negative times a negative is positive. Remember, when the signs are the same, we get a positive sign. And then I'm thinking 2 times 2. I'm going to get 4. Okay, that's not bad. What about my x values? Now, here, because I have different letters, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Okay, so sometimes I'm going to have X and Y. Sometimes I'm going to have A and B. Whatever letters I have, letters are just letters. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So I have letters X and Y. I'm going to go X first. So let me take a look at all my X's. The only thing that I have is X to the third. Okay, so I'm going to write that X to the third. I'm writing it now. How I would do it if I was doing this on paper. I'm going to show you in a minute how to type this. Okay. So for right now, let me just worry about how to work this. Okay. Now let me take a look at the y's. I have y to the fourth and y to the second. I just learned that in multiplication, and we're dealing with multiplication. You guys see this multiplication? All I have to do is add the exponents. So my answer here should be y to the 6. Right? All I did was I added my exponents, 4 plus 2. That's it. If I was doing this on paper, this is it. I'm done. Now, how I'm going to type this? Make sure you type this with no spaces in between, all together. The first thing is the number. Number 4, you just type in number 4, just the way you normally do. X to the third, I'm going to use this caret. We call this caret. It looks like a little arrow pointing up. You guys notice on your keyboard is right by 6, right on the same key as 6. You have to press Shift and 6 to get that arrow. That's basically an exponent. So x to the third, I'm going to write that as x caret 3. That's basically how I write x to the third. Now, y to the 6, I'm going to go y caret 6. So I'm going to use that caret. We call it caret. I have no idea why. It doesn't look like a caret, but that's the name. I'm going to use the caret key for exponents. And remember, my letters have to be in alphabetical order. Okay, let's take a look at question number 2. That's not bad. Number-wise, my first thing are numbers. -2 times a -4. 2 negatives make a positive, right? 2 positives also make a positive. If I only had one negative sign, my answer would be negative. I don't care which one's bigger. But in this case, I have 2 negatives, so it's going to be positive. 2 times 4, I know I get 8. Letter-wise, I'm going to look at the x terms only. That's the only one I have, so x to the third. And then let me take a look at the y's. That's the only y that I have. So it's y to the third. So that's simple. If I had more than one x, remember, add the exponents. If I had more than one y, add the exponents. Now there's going to be something tricky. Something tricky. Something, let's say I had an x to the third and an x by itself. When you don't see an exponent, it is 1. Okay? You're going to run into those in your homework. When you don't see an exponent, it is a 1. Okay, we didn't run into that here, number 2. The way I'm going to type this, I'm going to go 8 x to the third, y to the third. Remember, we use that caret for exponents. All together, no spaces, alphabetical order. Okay, so that was not bad. I said we're going to deal with 2 rules. Now, for the other rule, when we have parentheses, let's say I had something like x squared times y to the third, and then I'm going to have a parentheses, and let's say I have an exponent on the outside. I want to have a 3. This basically means that I have x squared times y to the third, x squared times y to the third, x squared times y to the third 3 times. And I said 3 times because that's the exponent on the outside. Now, we can just eliminate the parentheses because it's all multiplication. There's no exponents outside. We just have x squared times y to the third, x squared times y to the third, x squared times y to the third. If I look at the x's, we just learned that we just have to add the exponents. So it gives me x to the 6. If I look at the y's, I'm going to do y's with 2 lines. 3 plus 3 plus 3, because remember, I have to add the exponents, gives me y to the 9th. Now, an easy way to do this, a little bit easier way to do this, we could have just multiplied the exponent on the outside to the exponents on the inside. If I would have gone 3 times 2, it would have given me x to the 6. And then if I would have gone 3 times 3, it would have given me y to the 9th. So I'm going to use that shortcut. I'm going to multiply the exponent on the outside to the exponents on the inside. Now, one thing, every term inside the parentheses has an exponent. If I don't see an exponent, I'm going to put a 1 for it. So let's take a look at question number 3. I'm going to put a 4 to the 1 and x to the 1. I said every term inside the parentheses has an exponent. And I'm going to put a 1 for those exponents that I don't see. Because then I have to multiply this 3 on the outside to the exponents only. So that's going to give me 4 to the third, x to the third, and y to the 9th. Notice I multiply the outside exponent to the exponents on the inside. Okay, that was not bad. Now 4 to the third. Basically, it's asking me what's 4 times 4 times 4. I'm going to multiply 4 3 times. Use a calculator if you need to. My case, 4 times 4 times 4 happens to be 64. So I'm going to call this 64 x to the third, y to the 9th. The way I'm going to type this, 64 x to the third, y to the 9th. Remember, we use that caret for exponents. All right, let's take a look at question number 4. I'm going to write a 1 for my -3 and a 1 for my y, because I need to see exponents on the inside. Everything in the inside has exponents. And then the 3 on the outside, I'm going to multiply it straight to the exponents. So I have a negative 3. I'm going to put a parentheses because of the negative side. I have a negative 3 to the second power. I have a y to the third. And then I have an x to the sixth. Remember, I multiply my 3 on the outside, my outside exponent, to the exponents inside the parentheses. Okay, so my number, negative 3 squared, basically I have negative 3 twice. So negative 3 times negative 3. I know negative times a negative is, oh, no, that's not a 2. It's actually a 3, right? Yeah, I had a typo here. So I have a negative 3 times. Some of you were like, how's 3 times 1 equal to 2? I don't know. I just fixed it. I can make mistakes, right? We're all human, so it's fine. Okay, looking at the symbols. Oh, there's a bunch of negatives. Let's take a look at the symbols. I know two negative signs make a positive. So those become positive, but I still have one negative sign. Okay, so my answer will still be negative. So negative. Let me bring my sign. 3 times 3 times 3. I know 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. Remember in letters, I said put them in alphabetical order. So I'm going to call this x to the 6, y to the 3. Alphabetical order. That's what we call standard form. Let's keep it in alphabetical order. Okay, so far I've seen two rules, right? Questions 1 and 2, multiplication. You just add the exponents as long as it's the same letter. In question number 3 and 4, exponents. Exponents, we had the exponent on the outside, we multiply to the exponents on the inside. Now we're going to look at division. Let's talk about these rules really quick. One thing I would say is, let's say I had x to the 7th divided by x to the 3. I'm going to show you guys the long way. I'm going to explain this rule. What happens when we divide? I had x to the 7. Basically, I had 7 x's on the top, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm multiplying x 7 times. At the bottom, I'm multiplying x 3 times. Now, one thing that we learn in pre-algebra, right? One thing we learn in foundations is in a fraction, when the top and the bottom, it's all multiplication, top and bottom are the same, we can cancel one of each. So let me cancel one x here. Let me cancel one x here as well. And let me cancel another x right here. One x from the top, one x from the bottom cancel out. So then I have x to the 4th on the top, because now I only have 4 x's. At the bottom, I just have nothing. My nothing, I cannot leave it empty. So I'm always gonna, when I have everything empty, I'm gonna have it as, I'm gonna put a 1. Now, one thing, if the 1 was on top, yeah, leave it there. You cannot change your fraction. When the 1 is at the bottom, this thing stops being a fraction and it just becomes x to the 4th. Okay, let me say that again. When you have one of the sides of your fraction is empty, that empty, fill it in with a 1. If your 1 is on top of the fraction, you still have to write it as a fraction. If the 1 is at the bottom of the fraction, it stops being a fraction. Now, one cool thing here, though, is I'm looking at my answer was x to the 4th. Couldn't I have just done that from the beginning by subtracting my numbers? 7 minus 3. That would have given me 4. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I remember when I multiply, I added the exponents. So when I divide, I'm going to subtract, starting from the number on the top. So let me take a look at here. Everything has to have an exponent on the letter, so I'm just going to do that. For right now, let me write an answer here. Now, I'm going to look at my whole numbers to begin with. So my whole number, there's a negative sign, and there's a 2 at the bottom. If you have two numbers, one on top and one at the bottom, simplify. What do I mean with simplify? 6/8 becomes 3/4. Right? The way you simplify a number, you divide top and bottom by the same thing. I divided each by 2. Now, what if I had a 3/3? Well, they basically cancel out. So it's a 1. Remember, I said empty spaces is a 1. So if you have a number on the top, a number at the bottom, do simplify. In my case, I have no number on the top. So all I have is a negative sign on the front. Let me do this. Have a negative sign on the front and a 2 at the bottom. Nothing I can do. Now let me take a look at the x's. I know I have to subtract the exponents, right? I see a 1, I see a 4. When I subtract the exponents, 4 minus 1 is 3. Now, my question here is, do I put an x to the 3 on the top or do I put an x to the 3 at the bottom? You're going to put it where the higher exponent was. So the higher exponent is at the bottom, so we're going to put it at the bottom. So I'm going to put x to the 3 at the bottom of the fraction. Okay, now let me take a look at the y's. I have a y to the 1 and a y to the 3. When I subtract my exponents, 3 minus 1 gives me 2. So it's going to be a y to the 2. Put it where the higher exponent was. So in this case, let me put it at the bottom as well. Y to the 2. Uh-oh, I see the top is empty. And remember I said empties, we're going to put a 1 in there. If the 1 is on the top, you leave it as a fraction. If the 1 is at the bottom, it stops being a fraction. In my case, it continues being a fraction. If I had to write this, if I was doing it on paper, this is my answer. I'm done. If I was doing it on paper. Now, how am I going to type this? First, I'm going to worry about the sign. If I see a negative sign, whether it's on the top or the bottom or outside of the fraction, if I see one negative sign only, I'm going to write my negative sign first. I'm going to bring my negative sign to the front. Like I said, if I only see one negative sign, I don't care if it's on the top of the fraction, the bottom of the fraction, or in front of the fraction. I'm going to write my negative sign because my answer is always negative. Okay? Now that I have a fraction, let me write everything that I have on the top. In this case, just 1. I'm typing everything, no spaces, all together, okay? No spaces. Now, for the fraction bar, I'm going to do this backslash. And then let me type everything that I see at the bottom of my fraction. And then I have 2x to the third, y to the second. Remember how we do the caret, that little thing that looks like an arrow pointing up? We use that for exponents. That's it. That's exactly how I'm going to type this. Remember that I'm going to highlight this slash for fractions. Everything before the slash is what you have on top of the fraction. Everything after the slash is what you have at the bottom of the fraction. And also remember your letters, alphabetical order. Okay, let's take a look at question number 6. To begin with, I'm going to write a fraction here. I look at the signs. There's 2 negative signs, and I know that becomes positive. Remember how I said earlier, if there is one negative sign on the top, the bottom, or the front, bring it to the front. In this case, there's 2 negative signs altogether, so it becomes positive. I could have brought them to the front, but 2 negative signs become a positive sign. Number-wise, I only see a 2 on the top. So I'm just going to write a 2 on the top. Letter-wise, on X, I see an x to the fourth and x to the 2. I have to subtract them. I know 4 minus 2 is 2, so it's going to have an x to the 2. And remember, I'm going to have it right where I have the higher exponent. So I'm going to write it on the top. Because on y's, the higher exponent was on top. Now, let me take a look at the y's. This is a y to the 1 and y to the 4th. Let me write my 1 so I see it. Okay, I have to subtract my exponents, right? 4 minus 1 is 3. The higher exponent is at the bottom, so I'm going to write a y to the 3 at the bottom. Now, how am I going to type this? 2x squared over y to the 3rd. Okay, now some of you might be wondering, what if, because on your homework, sometimes you're going to run into something like that. What if you had a x to the 4th, y to the 3rd, over x to the 2nd, y to the 3rd? We know that x is x to the 2nd, and it goes on top. But what about the y's? When they become 0, what happens when my exponent becomes 0? Then don't write it. It's gone. It cancels out. It's done. So the y's in that example, I would not write. So like I say, you guys are going to run into that in your homework. Remember this one, I will put a 1 at the bottom, but then it stops being a fraction. So it's just x squared.